The Laurier Centre for Military, Strategic and Disarmament Studies will offer a battlefield study tour open to the general public as well as university students in May 2014. The tour will be focused on D-Day and the Battle of Normandy, but as always, we will begin the tour with an on-the-ground analysis in Dieppe. This decision-making exercise is based on the one we use to engage students in critical thinking at the strategic and operational level. Once on the ground in Normandy, we will employ the same historical approach involving everyone in TOOTS, or tactical exercises without troops, using the actual orders, maps, and air photographs from 1944. For more information about the study tour, consult our website. But for now, let us turn to the Dieppe Raid. The purpose of a decision-making exercise is to encourage participants to think historically and avoid hindsight by asking questions like what the decision makers knew or thought they knew at the time the decision was made. What could reasonably be inferred from what was known or thought to be known? What role did historical memory play in limiting or shaping choices? And lastly, what resources were available? We need to begin in March 1942, when Winston Churchill decided to appoint Lord Louis Mountbatten, a well-connected but inexperienced naval officer, as a full and equal member of the Chiefs of Staff Committee, so that Mountbatten, as the commander of combined operations, could, quote, exercise influence upon the war as a whole in the largest sense, including strategy, as well as those operations which his own organization will execute. What led Churchill to elevate combined operations to this new level of importance in the war effort? Historians are able to compartmentalize issues, examining them in isolation. But for Churchill and other war leaders, it was all happening in the same time frame. New Japanese advances in the Pacific, a crisis in the Battle of the Atlantic brought on by changes in the German Enigma machines that the codebreakers at Bletchley Park could no longer read. And most important of all, top secret ultra-intelligence from Bletchley Park that Hitler was preparing a new offensive against the Soviet Union. What could Churchill do to help the Soviet Union in March of 1942? Well, he gave instructions to ensure that British supplies to Russia were not interrupted or delayed, and tried to take some of the weight off the Eastern Front by the heaviest possible air offensive against Germany, which could be produced by RAF Bomber Command. He also encouraged Mountbatten to build on the experience gained in commando raids on the lock gates at Saint-Nazaire and the radar installation at Bruneval, and mount a much larger raid on the coast of France. It would be a relatively minor contribution to aiding Russia, but any method of diverting German air power to the west was worth trying. The 1942 offensive against Russia provided the strategic context for the Dieppe Raid, but there were clear operational and tactical reasons for planning such an action. A joint and combined naval, air, and land operation had not yet been attempted, and COHQ's mandate required it to carry out such operations so that lessons could be learned before the amphibious invasion of the continent took place. The Allies then thought the invasion would occur in 1943. As we begin to look more closely at preparations for the raid, you will be asked to consider some difficult questions. Those who register for our MOOC will be able to use the discussion tab on the platform to present their answers and offer comments to fellow students and the instructor. For this decision-making exercise, students will have to use the comment feature on the Canadian Military History website. Dieppe was selected by the Targeting Committee of COHQ in April 1942 as the best site for a large-scale, 6 battalions plus airborne troops, raid because It was lightly defended. It was within the range of fighter aircraft based in Britain. And the beaches at and near Dieppe were larger than elsewhere on the parts of the French coast within range of fighter cover. After some debate within the committee reviewing alternatives, an agreement for an operation codenamed Rutter was reached. The plan called for the use of airborne troops to secure the large coastal gun batteries at Berneval and Varengeville, an assault landing at Pourville by 2 battalions and Puy 1 battalion to support landings by 2 infantry and 1 tank battalion on the main Dieppe beaches. A 3rd infantry battalion would form a floating reserve. The forces participating in Rutter were given limited air and military objectives in and around Dieppe, which were to be carried out during an 8 to 12-hour period ashore. Air support was to include a pre-raid attack on coastal defenses by heavy bombers of maximum intensity, and continuous air cover was to be provided by Fighter Command. Substantial military and civilian casualties were expected. We need to ask ourselves what would constitute success in such a raid for the Navy, for the Air Force, for the Army, and for COHQ. David O'Keefe, the Canadian historian and filmmaker, has argued that an additional reason for the Dieppe Raid was a plan to capture German code and cipher books for the naval Enigma machine. Certainly an assault commando of the Royal Marines was assigned to attempt this, but it seems unlikely that it was a major reason for planning the raid. If you reflect for a few moments, you will realize that these different organizations will have very different definitions of success. We also need to pause and consider the question of casualties. No one imagined a raid on this scale on the coast of France could be carried out without significant losses of men killed, wounded, and taken prisoner. Plans for the evacuation of the wounded and the allocation of hospital beds in England indicates that the Allied forces hoped for the best, but prepared for hundreds of casualties. On 13 May, the British Chiefs of Staff Committee considered the outline plan for Rutter and gave its approval as a means of furthering experiments in amphibious warfare, testing German coastal defenses around a port, employing army battalions rather than commandos, inflicting damage on the German Air Force, and diverting German air and ground strength from the Eastern Front. British Chiefs of Staff met again in early June to confirm or cancel the operation by considering its strategic and operational significance. Among the factors they considered was the Joint Intelligence Committee's appreciation of future events on the Eastern Front. The committee had concluded that the German offensive, expected to begin in June, would be, quote, touch and go, reaching a climax in the late summer. The JIC did not have a mandate to offer strategic advice, but it is evident that their views on the German summer offensive against the Soviet Union carried weight with the Chiefs of Staff, who decided to approve Rutter. On 5 June, the Rutter Committee met with General Montgomery in the chair and Major General J.H. Ham Roberts, GOC's 2nd Canadian Division, present for the first time. Roberts was accompanied by Lieutenant Colonel Church Mann, his GSO-1 senior staff officer, who outlined the tactical plan which stressed the advantages of landing tanks on the main beach. In 1942, the shock effect of the tanks was still regarded as the decisive weapon in land warfare. The minutes of the meeting record the words of Air Chief Marshal Lee Mallory, who proposed, and the meeting agreed, to, quote, cancel the bombing of Dieppe as a raid which was not overpowering, might only result in putting everyone on alert. Instead, cannon fighters should attack the beach defenses and the high ground on either side of Dieppe. Among the factors leading to the decision to cancel the use of heavy bombers were the War Cabinet's policy restricting bombing targets in occupied France, the problems of target identification and accuracy, and the issue of the value of tactical surprise in the Army plan. But if the bombing of maximum intensity was no longer part of the plan, how were the coastal defenses to be neutralized? Could medium bombers and hurricanes attacking with cannons suppress such defenses? The cliffs surrounding the beaches at Puy, Dieppe, and Pourville presented planners with a significant challenge, as the terrain provided ideal fields of fire for both direct and indirect weapons. Take a few moments and review the air photos of the landing beaches. The 4th and 6th Canadian Infantry Brigades underwent brief but intensive commando-like training on the Isle of Wight, while experiments in waterproofing tanks and developing devices to get them off the beaches were continued. Assault engineers who were to destroy anti-tank barriers and other obstacles were to accompany the infantry carrying satchel charges and other explosive devices. Infantry companies were to carry the maximum possible number of 2-inch mortar bombs, as this was the heaviest indirect fire weapon available. Specially trained gunners of the Royal Canadian Artillery were to accompany the infantry in the event that German artillery positions were captured with their guns intact. The assault troops would obviously have to count on surprise, speed, and shock, not firepower. On 11 June 1942, a full-scale dress rehearsal, Yukon 1, was held, but the Navy was unable to deliver the troops to the correct beaches, and great confusion ensued. A second rehearsal, Yukon 2, was held on the 22nd of June and was judged to be successful. After Yukon 2, General Montgomery expressed confidence that if the Navy gets us to the right place at the right time, then with average luck, the operation should succeed. If anyone can do it, the Canadians can. Let's pause and consider Montgomery's judgment. In your opinion, on the basis of what was known, or might reasonably be inferred from what was known, was his confidence justified in June 1942? As the final preparations for Rutter were being made, it was decided to begin withdrawing the troops and tanks by 1100 hours on the first tide, cutting the proposed time ashore from 11 hours to between 6 and 7 hours. This was done to deny the enemy the opportunity to, quote, reorganize on a scale that might prevent the withdrawal of the tanks. Despite this change, the tactical objectives assigned to the troops were left as they were. Rutter was cancelled on the 13th of July due to poor weather and an air attack on 2 assault ships loaded with troops preparing to attack Dieppe. The fully briefed troops were sent on leave with the warning that they were not to talk about operational matters. We will look at the decision to revive the raid in the next episode, Operation Jubilee, but it is important for you to decide whether Rutter was a promising operation that ought to have been carried out, or a deeply flawed plan. We look forward to hearing your views, but remember, no hindsight allowed.